Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazzard, and today I've got Podcast Town Throwdown. I've got the mayor of Podcast Town on the show today. I've got Elzie Flenard. He is phenomenal. He has got two shows. He's got Enterprise Now, which is this older show, and he's going to do a revamp. And he's got Podcast Town Throwdown, and he interviews a lot of podcasters himself. You don't want to pigeonhole Elzie. Don't even try. Describe him this way. He'll point out that one. Change your perspective and it'll lead you down another path, maybe without you even realizing it. He's a really creative guy, an entrepreneur, a family man, a business owner. No box fits. It doesn't exist. He's a man of original thoughts, all products of unique thinking. And I have to say, I found out he was an engineer first. And it shocked me because really he was all about mindset in this show. He's all about the strategic thinking and the way that things are. There was a little bit of a geek tech out in the middle there, but for the most part, this was not an engineer talking, at least not one that I would have expected. So that one floored me that when I found that out. You are going to really enjoy the mayor of Podcast Town, Elzie Flenard.
Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the Binge Factor.
Welcome to the show. So glad you're here. And let's have a Binge Factor Throwdown. Let's talk Podcast Town Throwdown, Enterprise Now. Two shows. You've had a lot of episodes between the two. I love that there's revamping and newness going on. That's a lot of fun. So we're going to talk about that over the course of today. But what got you into podcast to begin with?
Okay, so Tracy, do you want the long version or you want the shorter version of the story?
Whatever you think this audience wants to hear.
So I'll tell you the medium version. So my background is in engineering. I kind of grew up in the whole tech world. And so I knew when I was a little boy, I wanted to do things. I wanted to have a family and I wanted to run my own business. Long story short, I was running a side hustle for the better part of 15 years. And I was stuck. Revenue wasn't going in the right direction. I wasn't going to be able to quit this job that I absolutely hated. And so I knew I needed to do something. There was something missing. And so what I came up with is I needed to learn more about business. And so I said, if I email these people and ask them to pick their brain, there is zero chance that they're going to respond to that email. But I'll start a podcast, a show where we're talking about business, we're learning from them. They're more likely to say yes to that. So that's how I got into podcasting. Is literally, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a strategy. There was no target market. None of that stuff, right? It was simply, I wanted to learn from business owners. And so that's why I launched my show.
Curiosity, one of my favorite ways to start a show, right?
Exactly.
I love it. Absolutely love it. So how does it feel to have done so many episodes of Enterprise Now? What do you think you learned the most from it?
That is a loaded question, Tracy. But I think one of the bigger things that I've learned is that no matter how much you think you know, there's always something else to learn.
Isn't that the best part?
and there's always a different perspective. You know, if I were to look at myself, even as an entrepreneur today, from when I first started, I could go back to that same point and learn a dozen different lessons. And that's the thing, just being open to learning and understanding that there are things that you don't know. Even when you get to a certain level of success, to always be learning, to always be open to gleaning from people in their respective positions and places.
I think that's such a great way to look at it. I mean, you know, that's my favorite part about podcasting is I'm going to learn something from you today that I didn't know yesterday. And I'm going to turn that into something that I'm going to share with somebody else tomorrow. Like my favorite part about it, that sort of find it, learn it, pass it on kind of thing. So great. Well, you have started a new show recently. I mean, I guess it's been a few months now, Podcast Town Throwdown. And what made you start the new show?
So the new show, similar to, I was listening to your episode with Laura Meyer, I believe that is how you pronounce that last name. Every show should have a different focus. It has a different target, and it has a different purpose. Throwdown is fun, it's engaging, but we drop nuggets at the same time. And so the goal with that is to get fellow podcasters on the line and just share their knowledge, share their experience with other podcasters. Because to my earlier point, there's always something you can learn from everybody. There's, people restate things that you might know, but the way they said it just, hits a nerve or piques your interest. So the point behind Throwdown is to really connect with other podcasters and help each other grow through, number one, having fun, getting to know each other a little bit better, and sharing tips that we have that we've learned over the years as we've grown our podcasts.
And it's serving your business because now you're starting a podcasting business.
Yeah. The funny thing behind Podcast Town, it started as a branded group coaching program. And it was the funniest thing. I was sitting with my business coach one day, and he looks at it because I told him, I want to start this group coaching program. And he's like, Elzie, that's a great idea. You should do that. And so I go off and I do my homework, and I come back to him with this logo, Podcast Town. And he looks at it, and he kind of pauses for a second, and he says, Elzie, that's the brand, because we were branded under a different name before. And I said, I don't know what you mean. What? I appreciate the compliment. And he's like, no, I don't think you understand. Podcast Town is the brand. This other brand, it's fine, but I don't know what that means. Podcast Town is the brand. And so even though we've been around for 5.5, 6 years, we've more recently rebranded under Podcast Town because number one, it made sense. And number two, I was following the advice of my brilliant business coach.
Well, it's good. It is a really great brand. It reflects the fun that you have on the show, and you do have a lot of fun on the show. That is certainly a reason for everybody here listening today to go check it out. You have a very, I'm going to call it highly produced segmented show, meaning that you have throwdown segments. You have things that come in that takes time and energy, and it's not for everyone, but you do it really well.
Thank you.
Why did you want to do a show that was that, I'm going to say, that much work, had great output purpose, like it has a great output result, but it was a lot of work. What made you decide to do that? Was it just to highlight the services and the things that you do?
For me, everything that I do, I spent so much time doing things that I did not enjoy, going to a job that I hated. Working with people. I didn't hate the people, but I wasn't going to their family get-togethers after work either, right? So in my business, if it's not fun, I'm not doing it. And so I literally have so much fun producing the show. I produce it live. I have the soundboard here. So I'm producing it. I'm interviewing people. I'm having fun. I'm poking fun at them. They're poking fun at me. And so I think that doing it that way, it really transfers that energy because it feels like I'm having fun. And it's because I'm having
You're actually having fun.
I'm actually having fun. So part of it was that I really wanted to be organic, and I wanted the energy to come across. And I think that when people on an emotional level, when they have fun, they learn more. Right. It does something in our brains when fun is attached to learning.
I
agree. So if you're listening to the show and you're like, this guy's nutty, he's goofy, but what he brought up about reciprocal interviews, it's a really good point. I should implement that into my podcast strategy. So it's a really cool mix of having fun, this goofy mayor of Podcast Town, and you are actually getting some solid tips and tricks in podcasting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you, the mayor of Podcast Town, which is who you are, it's in your great intro. It's one of my favorite intros that I've heard in a long time. And I listen to a lot of shows. So you really caught me on your intro, which would make me listen, right? So that's something that drives people through and into your show when you have this fun, exciting intro that you gotta find out who this guy is who self-named himself the mayor of Podcast Town, right? You got to find out who that is and get to know him. And so that's why you all are going to want to check out Elzie's show. So I want to jump into our 5 things because I think now's a really good time and I want to get to some more strategic conversation later. But we have our 5 things that we talk about every single week here on the Binge Factor. And there's sometimes they seem like really basics, but they are the things that I think you probably would agree with me that your clients struggle with, as do mine, that these are the same things everybody has issues with. Because every so often here we get the question, it's like, I wish I was doing that better, right? So how do you get great guests for your show? And let's specifically talk about Podcast Town because that's sort of your newer one.
Got it. I think for me, a great guest is somebody who fits into the target, right? Somebody who, number one, wants to have fun because that's the whole point, right? That's the whole point of this whole life thing. Like, if it's not fun, then what's the point, right? Somebody who is a podcaster for obvious reasons, and people who understand the growth mentality, because where Podcast Town Throwdown is about 3 things: growing as a podcaster, the skill set. Because when I first started podcasting, if you had a show and your voice was on a recording, you were a podcaster. But as more people get into the industry, you actually have to have some skill now. How to listen,
surprise,
how to interview. So there's a skill set behind it, right? So the show is meant to really hone in on those skills. Like, I still get people ask me, well, what do you mean by the craft of podcasting, right? So really hitting in on what that even means. Somebody who understands growth. A lot of people in this space are using social selling. Some people are using in-person networking. So understanding what growth means, really focusing in on what growth means for your show specifically, and not having this grand idea that if you don't have a good billion downloads, your show is not successful. And then lastly, creating revenue or value from your show. So those are sort of our 3 pillars. And so my guests,
they have good lessons to share as guests, right?
Exactly. Right. And so a perfect guest for me is someone who understands those 3 pillars and are actively what I call killing it in those areas.
That's wonderful. So you have a criteria, which I love that you have criteria because so few do. They take anyone. And I'm sure when you started Enterprise Now, for instance, you weren't so discerning, and you learned that over time that you wanted to be more discerning.
If you had a breath in your body, you didn't even need a microphone, really. Like, if you were willing to come on the show, you were welcome.
Yeah, but these are the things you refine as you get into your newer show and realize, like, I can change things and change the way it works. I love that. Really good there. So then the second thing is increasing listeners. We all want more listeners, even if we're not as like hyper focused on the numbers, of which, like, I try to get my clients not to be hyper focused on the number, but we all still want more listeners. So what do you do in outreach and other things to help increase listeners?
Social is huge. Social will be the number one. Just really being intentional and authentic in your engagement on what types of posts you're engaging on, but not being cheesy. Making the engagement thoughtful and authentic. Right. And it's a slow grow process, but it's a deep grow process. So the connections that you do make, even though they might take a little longer, they tend to be more higher value, and not just in dollars, but in what I call return on relationship, ROR. Right. So those are relationships that, for me, when I see them at a local networking event, then there's an instant connection because we've engaged on social. We've messaged each other, and I didn't ask them for anything. I'll message you on LinkedIn and wish you a happy weekend, for example. So just little things like that. And really, I really just want to wish you a happy weekend. I don't want anything. I'm not going to invite you to an event. I don't want you to buy my stuff. I just saying hi. So just engaging on social meaningfully. And the other big one is email. Your email list is your currency. And just making sure that you're constantly providing value, again, over and beyond asking for something, because people really gravitate to people who are givers and people who want to add value, right? I'm big on the farmer mentality, planting those seeds and harvesting them and being a connector and helping people to get what they want. And that in turn gets you what you want, which is more listeners.
That's wonderful. So do you do weekly emails? Do you do them in a certain way and how you're putting out your information?
So I always tell my clients to do two different emails. So a lot of my clients have a podcast that's affiliated with their show. So I'll have them do an email specifically for that show when it releases, and then have a related email that goes out to the larger email list. So basically, if it's a weekly show, they're going to get that update on the newest episode with a very focused, catchy subject line and really, really solid content in between. And then also some sort of follow-up in that overarching email. Maybe they do it biweekly or maybe it's monthly, but at least once every time a new episode posts.
Wonderful. Thank you for those tips. Those are great. I agree with you. Email is really important and much overlooked for a lot of people. You were talking about social media, and I want to hit on it again as we hit to the engagement piece. I got some questions to follow up there, but our middle one that we talk about here is producing like a pro. Now, you were talking about doing these things live, and I think your production value is all in the fact that you do this live. Would you give us some insights into how you produce it that way?
So, and they don't even pay me for this, but the Rodecaster Pro board is the most wonderful piece of podcast equipment on the face of the planet.
Quite an endorsement there.
It really is. When I first started, I had my external mixer, I had a headphone amp, I had all these different pieces of gear, and now it's all in one piece. So I can load all of my sounds into one pad. And obviously I have a little a showrunner that I is color coded, of course, because I'm a bit anal that way, with what sounds, what colors goes with which segments, and really I really find it fun and engaging because the guest gets to see me producing it live. And they even come in and produce some of their pieces live. So it's a really cool way to engage, even on a podcaster level, to just produce a show in a way that's a little bit different.
I love that. I think it's really what gives your show such great energy. And it's what, at the end of the day, I'm going to hit into your bingeability, but it's at the end of the day, that energy is one of the factors in there. So, and it's that live piece that really is working for you. So good for you. Thank you for sharing. Engagement, encouraging engagement. You were talking about social media. What social media platforms are some of your favorite, and where do you find that you get the most engagement?
So Tracy, I've been over the place in past years, all over the place in past years. Recently, I'm trying to focus my attention and energy on one platform and then repurposing content for for other platforms. LinkedIn has been huge for me because a lot of the people that I'm speaking to, that's where they hang out. I'm on Instagram, but it hasn't been huge for me. I know a lot of people are finding some success on LinkedIn, on Instagram. But for me, the overarching concept is really finding what works for you and doing more of it. Again, Facebook has been great for me for brand awareness, for engagement. Like if we're doing a ribbon cutting for the new studio, or if we're bringing on a new person or something like that, Facebook tends to be better for me for that. People tend to not become clients necessarily, but it gives me brand love, which is people that are talking about us, liking, commenting, sharing. And then in turn, clients see that and then they reach out. So
what are you doing specifically that you would call engagement piece on LinkedIn? Are you engaging via chat? Are you engaging right through your posts?
Directly on the post. So, and so this kind of goes back to the authenticity piece. So these are posts that I actually, am interested in. So maybe it has nothing to do with podcasting at all. Maybe it's somebody that posts something that inspires me, or something that causes me to remember something, or it was just a solid piece of marketing advice, right? So it's really just being authentically engaged. And what I found that happens is other people see that and they engage with you. And then they look at your profile and they see what you do and why you do it. And then they message you or they call you. For a perfect short story is in the studio here, there's a door, and people were walking by and they had on high heel shoes. Well, I don't have to tell you that's an issue because the sound was getting into the recording. And so I go to the lab manager here and I say, can I get an area rug for this area, because the high heels are getting into the recording. And he says, I said, I don't think corporate will let us do that. But what you can do is you can put a runner out and then pick it up every time when you're done recording. And so I hop on Amazon and I'm looking up runners, and a red one pops up. And the marketer in me says, I want to buy this red carpet to roll out the red carpet for customers. And so I buy the red carpet and I put it down and it worked great. And I take a picture. It was like a 4-second clip of me showing the carpet and up at our sign. I posted it on LinkedIn and I got 3 calls from people who wanted to come in and use the studio. So I wasn't planning to get a client from it. It just organically kind of happened. So that's what I mean by just being authentic and just allowing it to be organic. So I mean, as much as I would like to say I'm, brilliant.
You planned
idea,
that, right?
Yeah, it was completely random.
Well, now you're going to have to go and have one printed. Like you can have those carpets printed. You're going to have a red one printed with your Podcast Town logo on it. So that when people do come in the studio or walk by the hallway, they're now like, this is where Podcast Town is. So you can have, that's your next upgrade, right? I love it. I love it. Such a great suggestion about how to get people to engage, is you're just really sharing something very useful and something very that hits home. It's like, oh, I needed that. That's why I'm contacting you. Yeah, wonderful. Well, our last thing on our list of 5 things is to talk about monetizing your show. And in your case, because, monetizing is more clients and all of that, but you've got so many guests who came on to really, who are really killing it with business building. So what have you seen that's really working in podcasting that you're seeing that is doing a business building monetization view?
I think for me, again, it goes back to relationships. Business is relationships. It's the old saying is not what you know, is who you know. That's the saying because it's true. It's when you build solid relationships, even though, the person that you're interviewing, they may not come on as a client, but if you do your part as a great host, they'll remember you. And when they run across somebody who's looking to launch a show or grow their show, they're going to think about you. Or when, 3 degrees separated, when they think of somebody, they're going to think of you. So I think that the biggest part of business building is just the relationship side. And again, adding value. If I know that you host a conference every year, I'm going to help you promote that thing. I'm going to help you get people to your conference. If I know that you provide coaching services, when I run across somebody who needs what you have, I'm gonna refer them to you. So again, it's just having the farmer mentality and just harvesting the good feels, as I like to call it, and just repeating that process is to me the most effective way to grow a business.
Wonderful. Well, Podcast Town seems like it's really thriving and you've got a really nice community of coaching. What are some of the most common questions you get in your groups?
Oh boy. What do I talk about?
What do you talk about the most, right? What are you always repeating?
Yes. What do I talk about in my podcast? Where do I start? How long should it be?
How long should it be? Oh my gosh. I think that's probably my number one question that I get again at every event. There will be somebody who will ask that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the other ones. How do I make money from my podcast? How many downloads is a good amount of downloads? I get the equipment question a lot. What mic do I need? How do I get guests for my show? I could go on and on, but those are some of the main ones that I get a lot.
Well, I want to mention one more thing about guests, because you have a mix between clients and what I'm assuming are prospective clients, right? Like that you're talking about on your show. Do you find that there's a certain ratio that's good? Because, having only prospective or having only existing clients would be not a great model for anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I try to do it, and it's loose. Sometimes it's a 2-to-1, sometimes it's 3-to-1. So three parts, non-prospective to one prospect. But really, again, it's one of those things that I kind of allow to be organic. I have the criteria for each, right? So I'm looking for X, Y, and Z in terms of prospective clients. And then for the, regular guests, I'm looking for 1, 2, and 3. And so I just sort of let it kind of happen organically. My team, they know who I'm looking for. And so they'll present them, and then we'll kind of select from that list. But I try to keep about a 2-to-1 ratio between those, so that it's not, to your point, that it's not always a prospective client or always a person that's, a podcaster that may be a contemporary, if you will, and doing something similar than to what I'm doing.
Interesting. That's a good choice. So let's talk bingeability, because hey, this is the Binge Factor, right? So when did you realize your first show was getting binged on?
That's a good question. I think when somebody told me.
This is what I keep hearing again and again. So somebody finally reached out to you and said, "Hey, I've been listening to your show," right?
Yeah, and they'll bring up like something that I said, or because we do trivia on the show, and then we do two truths in the line, things like that, and they'll bring up like one of the things. They're like, "Elzie, you missed that 2 out of 3 of the 3 of the episodes." I'm like, I don't even know that I did that. So.
You're like, you need to brush up on your trivia. I love that. Like, they're ripping you back, which shows you that they had fun, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a really good thing. So do you advise your clients, or do you have any advice for creating a bingeable show?
This is going to sound 30,000 foot, but I think it really cuts to the heart of what makes people listen to anything, whether you're talking about a podcast, a TV show, a basketball game, is connectability. When people connect and whatever you're doing resonates, they want more of it. So it could be a blog post, right? But if it connects and people can relate to it and it resonates, they'll read more of them. So I think with your podcast, I keep saying authenticity, but it needs to be authentically you. I can't do a show that's like somebody else's and expect it to have the same result. It has to be Elzie, right? It has to be this fun, goofy. It has to be. And I think that connection is what makes it binge worthy.
This is such an interesting thing, because people ask me, it's like, I just did over my 100th episode airs tomorrow after the day after we're recording this. And so, after 100 episodes, have I not repeated myself over the Binge Factor? And I'd say, there's themes, there's definite like themes that go on, but it's unique for every single show. And, there have been shows that I've identified that didn't have a binge factor, but I didn't invite them on. So like they didn't make it the cut to even get here to talk about. So, you made the cut because you got a bingeable enough show. So like that works, that works in my favor. At least I don't have to turn somebody down, tell them, sorry, your show's not good enough. I don't have to do that on air, but there are themes, but every single one is unique and different. And I think that is that sort of personality twist factor that comes in place. So what do you think your binge factor is?
I would have to go back to fun. I think when you listen to Throwdown, you're like, number one, this dude is having a blast. And I think the way we break things up, so it's not all, serious. How do I grow my podcast? How do I get better as a podcaster? How do I make money? It's like that's sprinkled in there. So I think you get a combination of fun and you're getting the tips that will help you grow your show. So if you listen to a handful of shows, you're going to walk away with tips on how to grow your show. You're going to become a better podcaster because of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is your binge factor. Your binge factor is what I call substantive fun. So it's got lots of deep, great substance in it, but the fun is interjected. And this is where you, Elzie, are fantastic at it. Your craft of knowing when to bring in a sound effect or bring in a little bit or do something reinforces the substance portion with the fun right at the right moment. That is true craft right there. And not everybody could do that. They sometimes get too programmatic about it, right? You've seen them. There's like, okay, now it's time for this segment. And now it's time for this segment. And it's like the fun is forced, but it's not with you. Your fun reinforces that substantive message that you're trying to get across.
Well, thank you. That means a lot coming from you.
Well, you're welcome. So, launching shows. So you get to talk to a lot of podcasters that have already been doing shows, what they're doing right, doing things, but launching shows is daunting. So we've got a lot of listeners out there who have not pulled the trigger yet. They have not started their show. What advice do you have for them to get started? Because it's, they might listen to your show and think, ooh, I can't pull that off. And it might hold them back. But what advice do you have for them?
That is such a loaded question. I think the biggest piece of advice, and I made this declaration as mayor I used to say 5 years, but I think that seeing the growth of the industry and where we are, I'm going to say in 3 years, if you are a business owner, you will be in the podcast space. You will be either hosting a show, guesting on a show, or sponsoring / advertising on a show. If you are not doing one of those three things in 3 years, you are behind.
Yeah, I think some people are already behind, right?
So I'll make that proclamation.
I love it.
So in terms of advice, I think the biggest piece of advice in terms of mindset is understanding that you don't have to have a top 10 Apple podcast show for it to be successful. I think a lot of times that holds people back because they look at it and say, well, I'll never be a Joe Rogan or some here or the other podcast.
Dak Shepard, right?
Right. So I think that's the first thing is setting proper expectations. And I think from a business perspective, just understanding that this is a relationship builder, it's a cultivator, connector, communicative platform that informs the other metrics that you put in place. Outside of that, I would say hire a team that does it all the time, because that's going to save you time, that's going to save you money, and it's going to be more efficient than if you go to YouTube University. Because
and get some old outdated advice, which happens. Yeah.
So you don't have to use us, but my recommendation is that you use some, a team that's what they do. So they know all the tips, tricks, and the nuances of how to launch a show the right way.
Keep you from making those rookie errors.
Exactly. And then thirdly, I would say be patient. It is a long tail strategy. It is not we released our podcast yesterday and now 50 clients called us. Maybe that happens, but most likely it won't. So I would say really all of my advice is around mindset. and really understanding that having a proper strategy, right, and a mindset, and making sure that you have metrics, which is why, again, you want to have somebody who is really good at the launch process to help, because they'll be able to help align that your messaging with your metrics and your social strategy and your overall marketing strategy and all the stuff, right? That as a newbie, it can be overwhelming to think about not only the production side, but now there's the marketing, and then now there's the managing the day-to-days and all the stuff that comes along with managing a professional podcast. I would say, again, have a great strategy, understand what your goals are, and hire a professional.
I love that. Great tips and advice. So, okay, for those out there who already have a show, and what kind of advice can you give them? Or what kind of things do you tweak immediately when you get a client that you say, this is going to be effective? And so what are some of those effective changes that people can make to their show as an existing podcaster?
Yeah, a lot of times I find that people don't, even if they're podcasting usually it happens around year one, where they kind of settle in and they're like, okay, this is we're getting some success. We're getting some clients, or we're getting some brand recognition. This thing is something we want to include in our long-term strategy, but they still don't have the things like, okay, what are our top 3 metrics? How do we measure that this thing is working? What's our social strategy? How do we know that that's working? How do we know that our engagement is increasing? How do we know that people are responding to our emails? Do we have an email list, right? So all the sort of the marketing things behind the show, I'm finding a lot of people who sort of are about the 1 year mark, right? They need to really fine tune those strategies, and then just focus on their message, their target, and really being intentional about building one listener at a time, and really designing that customer journey. Like, what happens when they first listen? Then what do we want them to do? Do we want them to follow us on social? Do we have a lead gen PDF that we want to give them? So really just growing out that sales funnel and building that ecosystem so that we can farm those listeners.
Oh, you have such good farming analogy throughout this whole show. I love the metaphor. We're really working on that. And, Podcast Town needs to have growth, right? You got to have some food. You got to have some sustenance coming in. So that makes a lot of sense. Elzie, Podcast Town Throwdown, great show. Enterprise Now is as well. And I look forward to listening to and catching up with it as you make a revamp to it in the near future. What are your plans in revamp?
Plans and revamp, there'll definitely be more production, more fun. When I started Enterprise Now, it was more of a more serious show. We focus a lot on mindset and sort of the underlying motivations and intentions behind the business. The revamp will be not necessarily similar to Throwdown, but it'll definitely be more fun, and it'll be more open to exploring the nuts and bolts of business. Whereas before it was, I really wanted to get to know the person behind the business, and that'll still be the case. But in the new iteration, we want to talk nuts and bolts. We want to talk, okay, when you're creating your marketing strategy for a new vertical, what does that look like? How do you know when to shut down a division of a company, or how do you know when it's time to launch a new podcast for your business? Those types of things. So really kind of combining the mindset and the human behind the business to the nuts and bolts in business and how to be successful. I
love that. That should really put in that now piece for you. It'll like really reinforce that this is something I can do now to change something, right? I love that. That's a great idea. And I think that's going to serve you well. So I look forward to hearing that. Elzie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. Look forward to how Podcast Town grows, and look forward to seeing what comes next for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
I just love it when someone has some really good background and tips. So, Elzie has the benefit of having a coaching program, a full program, a studio that he rents out, that he has people come into, that he has clients come through, helping them with pre-production, post-production, like the whole gamut of everything. And because he does that, he has a better perspective on those universal things. So that's why I asked him some different questions than I ask normally of podcasters on the show. I wasn't asking him specifically about his show. I was asking him about the advice that he gives out most commonly. And that's because these things are going to be common to you as well, right? These are the things that come up again and again, no matter whose show we're talking about, right? No matter where we're going with it. And, my favorite part of what he said there was that he truly believes that within 3 years, we are all either going to be hosting, guesting, or advertising on podcasts. That is going to be so ubiquitous that it is going to be everywhere, and every business needs to have some stake in that. So why not join early? Why not jump in? It is about time you stop listening to the Binge Factor and instead become a show host who can be on the Binge Factor, right? So take Elzie's advice, jump in, go start your show, really get through there, get a team to help. It doesn't matter who. It doesn't matter if you decide to come and work with us at Monetize, work with Elzie at Podcast Town, get someone in to work with you, because if it's what's holding you back, let's eliminate that right now. I hope he inspired you today to have much more fun on your shows, to get going, take it seriously with putting substance in it, but not take it so seriously that you don't have fun, because otherwise you're not going to keep podcasting. You're not going to go from one show like Enterprise Now and move into Podcast Town Throwdown, right? You're not going to find your path just like Elzie Flenard did. So I hope you enjoyed this show. I hope you're inspired to come on my show, or try and go on Podcast Town Throwdown, go on Elzie's show, right? Get going with your podcast, get it moving, get yourself up to that point at which you've built in that binge factor. You built in all those special features that are making your podcast help you grow your business, your message, your mission, your perspective in the world, and get that voice of yours out there. So thanks everyone for listening. This has been Tracy Hazzard on the Binge Factor, and I'll be back next week with yet another podcast and another bingeable show.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.